While I slept, another story unfolded, and I was the last to know. The house was too quiet, and the silence had a metallic taste, like a blade about to cut. For a long time, I believed that the tranquility of the nights was a sign of mature love. That his body, resting beside me, was a refuge, a security. I was wrong. What seemed like rest was a disguise. What I called routine was, in reality, a well-rehearsed choreography, where I was merely the backdrop. While I dreamed of tomorrow, he lived in a now that didn't include me. The clues were there, scattered in details too small for anyone to believe yet. A noise in the early morning, a strange reflection on the dark TV screen, the blue glow of the cell phone hidden under the pillow. I told myself it was all in my head, but my instinct wouldn't shut up, not even when my heart begged for silence. Trust, when broken, doesn't make a sound. It shatters from within like glass under a rug, and every step is a cut. I began to feel these cuts in banal gestures. The cold goodnight kiss, the fleeting smile, the averted glance when I called him. Small tears in a story that once seemed perfect. The danger lies in what we don't want to see. And I, blinded by love and habit, realized too late that the enemy was sleeping just inches from me. Some say the truth comes like a bolt of lightning. In my case, it came silently. In the sound of light footsteps, in the creaking of a door that should never have been opened. I remember the first time I woke up feeling like I wasn't alone, even with him by my side. The air felt different, thicker, as if the house was breathing on its own. I got up slowly, my heart racing, and it was in that instant that I realized. Something inside me already knew, long before the evidence arrived. Betrayal has a scent, a sound, and a texture. The scent of a perfume that isn't yours. The muffled sound of a voice that doesn't belong in the house. The cold texture of a lie that brushes your skin and you don't hide it. I experienced all of this in a single night. One of those nights that divide life into a before and after. What's at stake when the truth is hidden under the same roof isn't just a marriage. It's sanity itself. It's the fear of not recognizing the face of the person you love. It's the distrust that grows slowly, like mold on a white wall, until it invades everything. And when you realize the danger is inside the house, sleeping next to you, what do? Do you pretend not to see it? Or do you risk everything to find out what it's doing while you sleep? The answer seems simple, until you wake up and realize that the nightmare was always awake before you. For years, I prided myself on being a patient woman. I believed that understanding others was proof of love, that silence was a virtue, that time would fix everything. But time doesn't fix what others insist on breaking. It only widens the cracks, until one day the light shines through, and you see what was always there. The early mornings began to bother me. It wasn't insomnia, it was intuition. I would wake up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason, feeling something moving in the house. The cold sheet beside me betrayed its absence. First I thought it was work. A responsible, busy man, concerned about the comfort of the home. He told me this as if repeating a prayer, but deep down something told me it wasn't. The routine began to take small twists and turns. The wet towel left in the bathroom, the sound of footsteps in the hallway, the soft click of the door closing at 3 in the morning. I pretended to sleep, trying to decipher the pattern. Sometimes I heard the kettle, the creak of the kitchen chair, the scrape of a piece of furniture. Other times nothing. Just silence, that same silence that has body and breath. One day before dawn, I heard him speaking in a low voice. A muffled voice, heavy with complicity. I lay still, my eyes open in the darkness, and felt my heart pounding like a drum inside my chest. He returned minutes later, breathing heavily, and lay down as if nothing had happened. I pretended to be asleep, but something inside me completely awoke. It's funny how love, when hurt, doesn't die suddenly. It rots slowly, smelling of old memories and tasting of lies. I watched him all day. The same man I thought I knew. Kind to others, impatient with me. Always with his phone nearby, always distracted, as if he were in another world. And maybe he was. I began to realize that danger lurks in what seems ordinary. In the spilled coffee on the white tablecloth, the too quick smile, the curt answers. Everything becomes a clue when trust disappears. The house became a stage, and I, an obligatory spectator of my own disillusionment. He had no idea that I saw everything. Every gesture, every pause, every blank stare. There were nights when I woke up just to look at the hallway. The dim kitchen light drew a line on the floor, as if inviting me to cross. But I didn't. Not yet. I needed to be sure. Because doubt is worse than pain. And once certainty arrives, there's no turning back. I began to notice times, sounds, movements. Every day my silence took shape, transforming into a strategy. While he slept soundly at dawn, I watched him like someone studying an enemy. I was no longer the patient wife. I was the woman who had finally learned to listen to her instincts. It's strange to say, but a new calm came over me. A strength that came from fear but also from clarity. Because understanding the evil that surrounds you is the first step toward not letting it suck you in. And that's precisely why so many people choose to stay here after each revelation. Because they know that sometimes what saves a life is recognizing the moment when love turns into danger. At that moment, I still didn't know exactly what I was doing while I slept. But I felt the secret moving inside the house, breathing the same air as me, waiting for the moment when I would finally open my eyes for real. And when that moment came, nothing was ever the same. Every night, the interval between sleep and wakefulness shortened. It was as if my body refused to rest, afraid of missing the exact moment I woke up. I felt it move beside me, with the gentleness of someone who doesn't want to wake anyone. The mattress dipped slightly, the sheet slid across my skin, and then the sound came. Discreet, repeated, calculated. The soft click of the door, the distant creak of wood in the hallway. Then nothing. Just the echo of silence and my heart pounding in my chest. There was something hypnotic about the way he left. Always with the same care, the same meticulous routine, like a burglar familiar with every shadow in his own house. At first, I still doubted what I was seeing. I thought it might be a dream, a nocturnal delirium. But it only took one night of wakefulness for me to understand that I hadn't imagined it. He really was getting up. He really was disappearing. And the most terrifying thing wasn't the act itself, but the serene gaze with which he greeted me in the morning, as if he'd been sleeping beside me the whole time. The truth began to torment me in the objects. In the still warm mug I'd left in the sink at dawn. In the strange glow of the computer screen I swore I'd never use. In the sweet, lingering perfume that filled the hallway, mingled with the smell of coffee. It was as if the house were conspiring to reveal what it was hiding. Every corner, every noise, seemed to hold a secret. I tried to act natural, but my voice wasn't the same anymore. My words faltered, my smile seemed rehearsed. He understood something even when I didn't say anything. Sometimes he looked at me curiously, as if trying to decipher how much I knew. It was a game of dress-up, and the greatest danger was that he would start to play along. One night, I sat motionless on the edge of the bed, pretending to be asleep. The clock read 3:14 when I heard his footsteps. Precise, light, almost elegant. He passed me like a shadow, and in that instant I understood that the fear wasn't just that he would betray me. The fear was discovering how accustomed I was to living with lies. The light from the hallway cast a yellowish strip across the floor, cutting through the darkness of the room like an open wound. I stared at it for long minutes, a mixture of fear and curiosity. There was something out there calling me. Something that needed to be seen. I stood up but hesitated, because crossing that line meant abandoning forever the woman I thought was safe. The next day, the air between us was thick. Every gesture of his seemed measured, every word rehearsed. The distance had become physical. It was as if there were two houses, one superimposed on the other. One visible, inhabited by routine and appearances. The other, underground, made of secrets and shadows. I lived in both at once, and it exhausted me. I began to notice the small signs of guilt. The quicker touch, the look that changed when the phone vibrated, the smile that came too late. He tried to keep up the charade, but the details gave him away. The body speaks before the mouth. And he didn't dare shout his truths out loud. During the day, I found myself trapped in a strange state of wakefulness. The sun filtered through the windows, but all I could see was the darkness of early morning. The world went on, neighbors laughed, traffic passed outside. But inside me, time had stopped. It was like living under a constant light that didn't warm, only revealed. It was at this threshold between sanity and suspicion that something in me changed. I stopped being a hostage to doubt and became the guardian of truth. I decided to observe, record, understand. Every dawn I woke up before him. With every movement I followed him, my gaze fixed on the darkness. I can't say what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the clarity of seeing it so close up. But I learned that the truth, when it's about to emerge, has a sound of its own. And in that house, that sound grew, pulsing in the walls, vibrating in the floor. I could feel it. Something was about to break. And when it did, nothing would ever be the same. That dawn, something inside me silently broke. It wasn't anger or fear, but a cold lucidity, a clarity that comes when the heart tires of denying the obvious. I no longer needed proof. His body, his distant gaze, the way time seemed to distort between us, everything already screamed the truth he intended to hide. Still, I wanted to see. I needed to see. Because sometimes pain only becomes bearable when it takes shape. I stood slowly, my bare feet touching the cold floor. The hallway seemed longer that night, and the air thicker. With each step, the beating of my heart mingled with the rustle of the curtain, the distant vibration of an electronic device. The house had a life of its own, an irregular breathing that seemed to observe my movements. When I reached the office door, I hesitated. The blue light of the screen flickered, and I saw him there, motionless, absorbed, immersed in something that shouldn't exist between us. There was no turning back. Curiosity was no longer curiosity, it was survival. The scene before my eyes took my breath away, but it wouldn't let me control myself. He typed hurriedly, his gaze fixed, his face illuminated by the reflection of the screen. A female voice sounded low, intimate, almost conspiratorial. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just watched. And in that silent observation, a part of me died, while another, older and stronger, was born. Time seemed to stretch on. The sound of the clock ticking mingled with his rapid breathing, and the contrast between us was almost poetic. He, lost in his disguise, me, awake, present, unwavering. It was at that moment that I understood the power of silence. Not the silence of submission, but of strategy. The silence that doesn't accept, only waits. The next morning, the routine was repeated as if nothing had happened. He drank coffee, talked about work, and kissed me on the forehead with that automatic gesture that no longer fooled me. I watched him calmly, and that calmness confused him. Perhaps he sensed deep down that something had changed. Perhaps he realized that I was now seeing him in a way I couldn't stand. The following days were a kind of theater. He played the exemplary husband, while I rehearsed the role of the serene wife, but behind the scenes I recorded everything. The camera that once held birthday photos now captured nighttime truths. Each click was a shred of justice accumulating, a fragment of what would become my liberation. Sometimes guilt almost tried to invade me. I watched him sleep, his face serene, and wondered when love had turned into vigilance. But soon the thought dissolved into the memory of the voices, the messages, the complicity that wasn't with me. The contrast between what I felt and what he believed he still had was the fuel that kept me going. And it's at this point that many feel the need to support this journey, leaving a silent sign that the message has touched them, because they know what it's like to recognize the exact moment when their heart breaks, but their soul awakens. As the days passed, I realized I was no longer afraid. What remained was the calm of someone who knows the outcome, even without having said a word. Every gesture of his became predictable, every lie more obvious. The house, once the stage for the farce, was now the space for my preparation. I moved with the lightness of someone keeping a secret, and the secret was my shield. Sometimes at night I would look in the mirror and barely recognize myself. The woman looking back at me had a different sparkle in her eyes. It was as if, beneath all the pain, there existed a new strength. Silent, mature, relentless. I knew something bigger was about to happen. The silence was about to speak. And when it did, no one would sleep peacefully. The curious thing is that the more I watched, the less fear I felt. The pain no longer came in violent waves, but silently, like a low tide slowly receding, revealing what was once hidden. And what was exposed after the waters of illusion receded was brutal. A corroded love, a lie constructed with care, a face I no longer recognized. Yet there was something liberating about this sight. It was as if, at last, I could see without veils, breathe without asking permission. With each recording, with each new entry, I understood that the truth didn't need to be shouted. It simply existed. And it existed, clear, throbbing, undeniable. I reviewed the images throughout the day, alone, in the dimness of the room, with the sound low and my heart silent. The voices echoed like slow knives, slicing not only through the marriage, but also through the woman I had been until then. Yet, between one blow and another, a new serenity was born, a certainty that kept me steadfast. The house felt different now. The rooms, once neutral, had their own personalities. The hall mirror reflected two versions of me. The old, fragile one, and the current one, patient, calculating, almost cold. The walls seemed to protect me, accomplices to my secret. The clock ticked not as a threat, but as a countdown. I knew the moment was approaching. There were days when I felt a kind of mourning. Not just for his loss, but for the death of a part of me. The part that believed in love as salvation. Trust, once broken, doesn't return. It transforms into something else, sharper, more conscious. And it was with this new awareness that I began to look to the future with a mixture of fear and hope. Sometimes over breakfast, I would watch him silently as he talked about work, politics, the weather. Empty words that no longer reached me. It was like watching an actor repeat lines that no longer moved the audience. I could see the sweat on his temples, the almost imperceptible trembling in his hands. I could feel the change in the air, though I didn't understand why. His role was about to crumble, and he didn't yet know that the audience had already looked away. But what surprised me most was the absence of hatred. I didn't want to see him destroyed. I wanted to see him exposed. There's a difference between revenge and justice, and the line between the two is thin, almost invisible. I walked it cautiously, knowing that once the truth came out, there would be no turning back. He would fall, and I couldn't pretend I hadn't pushed him. The nights, once long and sleepless, became vigilant. I no longer sought rest, but vigilance. The darkness was my ally, his breathing my guard. Every time he rose, I watched him with my gaze, cold, attentive, like a hunter studying the movements of his prey. And there was something almost poetic in this silent game. The woman he had underestimated now watched him as if holding the invisible thread that held the charade together. Times I thought about giving up. The burning desire to walk away, abandon everything, and start over burned in my soul. But there was something stronger driving me to stay. The need to prove that I knew. That he hadn't just cheated on a wife, but on a woman who, even hurt, still had power. The power to reveal, at the opportune moment, what she thought she'd buried in the shadows. The contrast was cruel. He slept peacefully, unaware that every night he was closer to bringing the truth to light. And that light wouldn't be gentle. It would be like the sun after a long storm. Blinding, inevitable, relentless. That particular night, the silence was so thick it seemed alive. I felt my breath catch in my throat. The air vibrated around me, and I knew it was about to happen. The truth, like a chain about to snap, trembled between us. And the moment it faded, nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same again. The next dawn arrived heavy, humid, dense, as if the air carried a warning. The walls seemed to breathe with me, as if they knew something was about to happen. Every noise in the house was a reminder that the secret was still there, latent but pulsing beneath the surface. He slept peacefully beside me. his face partially illuminated by the streetlight coming through the window. I watched him for long minutes, trying to understand at what point in my life I had stopped being part of his dreams and become a mere backdrop for his lie. The pain no longer came in bursts, but as an echo that was repeated in gestures, in silences, in memories that insisted on returning. Good memories sometimes. The quiet Sundays, the spontaneous laughter, the light caress on my shoulders when he called me my love. All of this still lived inside me, but with a different hue, like old photographs yellowed by time. The contrast between what we were and what we had become split me in two. A woman mourning the loss and another silently watching the birth of something new. Perhaps courage, perhaps coldness. Dawn arrived slowly. Light filtered through the gaps in the curtain and drew golden lines on the floor, slicing through the shadows. It was beautiful yet cruel. Beautiful because it revealed, cruel because it reminded me that every revelation comes at a price. I knew that when the truth emerged from the darkness, it would also transform me. I would cease to be a mere witness and become its author. And those who become the authors of their own destiny can no longer feign innocence. The hours passed slowly that day. I moved slowly, like someone carrying something inside them they can't quite let go of. The house was clean, tidy, and too quiet. He left early as always, and the slam of the door resonated like a warning that time was running out. Solitude, which had previously frightened me, was now my ally. In it, I organized my thoughts, remembered details, rehearsed words. Everything needed to be in its place. As dusk fell, I sat on the porch and watched the sky change color. Orange melted into blue. The day faded into soft hues, and I understood how beauty can coexist with chaos. My heart beat slow but steady. With each passing second, I felt the tension building, like a rope stretched to its limit. There was no turning back, and yet, a part of me wished there was. I wished that, by some miracle, he would truly look at me and say the one thing that could make me hesitate. "I'm sorry." But I knew that wouldn't happen. It couldn't. That night, it began to rain. At first, light drops, then the steady sound of drops hitting the ceiling, like a drum accompanying breathing. The smell of wet earth filled the room and brought me a strange peace, a sense of closure even before the end. I looked out the window and thought that perhaps that was the meaning of justice. Not the noise of revenge, but the silence of accepting that time will do what must be done. Still, the tension didn't leave me. The fear persisted because fear is the last thing to go. Fear of the unpredictable, of what would come next, of what I would become when the truth finally came out. But there was also hope, small and persistent, like a candle lit in the middle of a storm. It whispered to me that I was right, that no one survives by lying forever, that the light, no matter how late, always finds a crack to enter. I closed my eyes for a moment and smelled it, still present between the sheets, the same scent that had once comforted me and was now a bitter memory. I took a deep breath and the air felt heavier, as if the house itself were waiting for the outcome with me. And as the rain fell outside, I understood that the moment of revelation was no longer a distant possibility. It was there in the air, lurking in the corners, ready to happen at any moment. All that remained was to wait for the sound that would break the silence. That rain seemed to wash away not only the roof, but everything I had been. As I watched the drops slide down the window, I realized that the waiting had become almost unbearable. The secret I was keeping was like a taut string between us about to snap. And yet, there was a strange serenity in knowing that, when it snapped, it would be him, not me, who would fall. In the following days, something began to change. Small reactions, almost imperceptible, but visible to those who know how to read the silence. He began to get restless. His questions, once distant, were now accompanied by a certain fear. "Is everything okay?" he would ask, trying to gauge the temperature in the house. I responded with a brief smile, one of those that says nothing but says everything. The truth was already sneaking up on him, even if he didn't know it yet. The carefully guarded recordings were more than proof. They were mirrors. Every sound, every image, reflected the weight of her decisions and the power of my calm. Sometimes I rewatched them, not out of revenge, but as a strategy. It was important to remember who I was before and who I was becoming. Because at that moment, it wasn't just about unmasking a traitor. It was about understanding what a woman's silence can build when the world tries to underestimate her. The tension between us grew with small gestures. The way he dropped his fork on his plate. The quick glance at his phone. The sweat on his forehead when her name appeared on the screen. I saw it all. And even without words, he seemed to sense that something was different. The balance of power had shifted. He, who had once controlled the schedule, the words, the gestures, now lived under the same gaze he had once directed at me. The gaze of someone observing without being seen. It was almost poetic. With each lie he repeated, he drew closer to his end. And I learned something about the power of waiting. It's more destructive than any scream. Silent revenge ripens like fruit on a branch. In due time, it falls by itself, and the impact is inevitable. I just needed to let time take its course. But time is cruel to those who lie. Began to lose sleep. I spent nights awake, shifting positions, staring at the ceiling. I pretended to be asleep, but I heard everything. The shallow breathing, the creaking of the bed, the restless body. The house, once the scene of my fear, was now its labyrinth. And this gave me a strange sense of justice. Not the kind that seeks punishment, but the kind that restores the balance of what had been violated. The transformation was also visible in me. I no longer walked with the weight of doubt on my shoulders. There was lightness in my steps, firmness in my gaze. When he tried to touch me, I didn't flinch or respond. I simply stood there. Indifference is the ultimate expression of strength. It hurts more than any words. And in this contrast, between my silence and his concern, the truth began to reveal itself. I had made a mistake in trying to hide what was already exposed. Every attempt at disguise became an involuntary confession. It was like watching a castle crumble from within, stone by stone, until only dust remained. Sometimes I wondered what people would do in my place. If they too would prefer patience to outbursts, a glance to a scream. Perhaps that's the hardest part, maintaining silence until it becomes an echo. And that's why so many stories like mine inspire me to reflect, because in each one, there's someone trying to find the courage to act without losing their dignity. I knew the moment was approaching. I felt it in the air, in his breathing beside me, in the way he avoided my gaze. It was like watching a candle burn down to the end. The flame still danced, but it was already the last glow before the darkness. And what would come next wouldn't just be the end of a farce, but the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. Perhaps freedom, perhaps rebirth. But for now, all that was left was to wait. And waiting, I learned, is the strongest silence there is. The following nights were long, almost eternal. There was something in the air that couldn't be seen, but could be felt, like electricity before a storm. The silence in the house had changed tone. It was no longer the silence of my waiting, but his. A tense silence, filled with fear, a void between us that widened with each unspoken word. I could hear the sound of his nervousness, the clinking of cutlery, the repeated clicking of his pen, the creaking of his hands. The lie was beginning to squeeze him like a second skin, too tight to hide what lived beneath. The funny thing was, I felt no pleasure in seeing him like that. There was a strange serenity in me, something between compassion and exhaustion. I didn't want destruction. I wanted the truth. But sometimes the truth only emerges from collapse. And he was collapsing, slowly without realizing it. During breakfast, I noticed his face was no longer the same. The deep dark circles under his eyes, the evasive gaze, the automatic gesture of stirring the sugar in his cup. I watched him and wondered, how long does it take for a man to become completely lost in his own delusion? He talked about work, about trivial matters, and I saw the slight trembling in his hands. It was his body expressing what his mouth was still trying to deny. Time, which had once imprisoned me, now worked in my favor. He was my silent accomplice. Each passing day left him more vulnerable, more confused, more aware that something was slipping through his fingers. And that something was me. The woman who had previously remained silent now disarmed him with her gaze. Not with hatred, but with the certainty of someone who finally understands the game and refuses to play. Sometimes I saw him trying to get closer, making gestures that seemed affectionate. But his touch was cold, his voice uncertain. He tried to revive his role as a good husband, as if rehearsal could erase the past. But time doesn't teach us to love again. It teaches us to fear those who have already discovered too much. And he was afraid. I could feel it. One such morning, I opened the living room windows and let the breeze in. The fresh air blew away the accumulated dust, and for a moment, I breathed with the lightness of someone freed from it. The sun illuminated the old portraits on the shelf, and I gazed at them like someone gazing at characters in an old story, no longer their own. There was a bittersweet taste in that sight. Loss and achievement mingled, creating a new feeling, clarity. Clarity is dangerous, because once you see, there's no going back to pretending. He knew what he had to do. The plan was ready, detailed, kept secret. He still believed he controlled the narrative, but the story was no longer his. He was just waiting for the right moment, the exact instant the lie would be revealed. Because every deception has a breaking point, and he felt it approaching, like the distant sound of thunder announcing the inevitable. Between certainty and fear, there was a pause. This pause defined me. I walked through the house with light, almost ritualistic steps. I touched the furniture, smoothed the curtains, smelled the coffee. Every everyday gesture seemed charged with meaning, as if I were saying goodbye to something invisible. Perhaps to the woman I once was. Perhaps to the pain that still lingered. The strangest thing was realizing that, amid all the chaos, there was beauty. The beauty of quiet courage, of rebuilding that begins even before the end. The fear was still there, of course, but it no longer dominated me. It was simply a reminder that I was still human. That the heart, even after betrayal, keeps beating, still wants to believe there is life after ruin. That night, while he slept, I sat on the edge of the bed and watched him silently. The sound of his breathing was irregular, as if his body sensed its end. The moonlight filtered through the window and cast shadows on the floor, as if time had stopped to bear witness. The clock ticked with cruel slowness. Something was about to happen, I sensed it. The revelation, the fall, the impact. It was all there, suspended in the air, ready to unfold. And for the first time I didn't feel rushed. Because sometimes power lies not in acting, but in knowing how to wait for the exact moment when the other person collapses on their own. Time seemed to have become something physical, almost tangible. I felt its presence in every corner of the house. Heavy, slow, observant. The hours no longer passed. They floated above me. Each minute was a particle suspended between what I knew and what had yet to happen. There was an invisible tension in the air, as if the walls were breathing with me, aware of the secret that silently spread between us. He no longer slept well. He tossed and turned, muttering meaningless words, sometimes his name. I awake, simply watched. The fear once mine now lived in his eyes. It was almost poetic to see the mirror upside down, to see how the piece it once stole from me slipped through my fingers. But what surprised me was how much he had changed. What had once been pain was now lucidity. I understood his every gesture like someone reading a book from memory. Breakfast became a rehearsed choreography. The sound of spoons hitting cups, the smell of burnt bread, the muffled sound of her breathing. Everything seemed normal, and yet nothing was. She tried to smile, but her laughter was halting, lacking conviction. The words fell heavily on the table, aimlessly. I answered with brief monosyllables, letting the silence complete what I needed to say. The sun filtered through the windows, but the light seemed cold, almost indifferent. This mix of light and shadow reflected what I felt inside, a strange balance between the end and the beginning. I knew I was close, not just to revelation but also to something deeper. A kind of liberation that comes not from screaming but from understanding. The understanding that there is no going back once the truth has been seen. There were times when my heart still wavered. I found myself recalling small gestures of tenderness, old promises, a time when love was stronger than pride. And it was in these memories that doubt tried to creep in. Had I gone too far? Did justice also have an invisible limit, beyond which it became cruelty? But then I only had to look at him. His empty gaze, his tired body, the lie still fresh in his mouth, and everything became clear again. This wasn't about revenge, but about balance. The universe simply returning what had been discarded. The rain that afternoon brought with it a different sound. The drops tapped the window like impatient fingers. The wind blew through the cracks, spreading the scent of wet earth, mixed with the ancient perfume that still lingered in the air. The same scent I had once smelled on her clothes. It was as if nature itself participated in the outcome, bathing the stage before the final act. I watched him trying to maintain his daily routine, feigning normalcy. But his body betrayed him. His gaze searched for answers where there were no questions. He paced back and forth, as if trying to escape something inside him. With each step, I felt the distance between us widen, and with it, my certainty grew. He still believed he controlled the narrative, but control had long since changed hands. That night, I sat in the darkness of the living room, listening only to the ticking of the clock. Every passing second seemed to push fate a little further forward. The dim streetlight reflected on the wall, creating slowly moving shadows, like specters of what we once were. And there, amid the darkness and the distant sounds of the city, I realized that the end no longer frightened me. What intrigued me, however, was what would come next. Because, deep down, every ending carries the weight of a new beginning. I knew that, by revealing everything, nothing would remain of the life I knew. And yet, there was a thread of hope running through the pain, a subtle glimmer that told me that maybe, just maybe, the void left by the end could be the space where I would learn to exist again. As I stood up to turn off the last light, I saw my reflection in the window. The woman looking back at me wasn't the same. There were shadows, yes, but also clarity. And the most terrifying thing was realizing that I was no longer waiting for the moment of revelation. It was already happening, slowly, inside me. The rest would just be a consequence. And then, finally, the day came when the silence was broken. Not with screams or tears. It was with the calm of someone who waited the necessary time for the truth to come out on its own. Fate has a curious way of revealing what we try to hide. It doesn't need an audience, only patience. And that day, everything fell into place. I was sitting at the table, distracted, when the sound of the video began to echo around the room. The same room that had once held laughter now echoed with voices that were not my own. He turned, pale, trying to understand where the sound was coming from, and there, in the reflection of the screen, he saw himself without masks, without defenses. It was the most silent and deafening moment he had ever experienced. No words were spoken. None were needed. I didn't look at him right away. I stood there, watching the curtains sway in the wind, the sun filtering through the cracks and cutting the gloom like a blade. That ray of light seemed to split the room into two worlds. The old one, where I was silence and pain, and the new one, where I was voice and decision. When I finally looked at him, I realized there was no anger, only the end. And the end sometimes is another way of beginning. He tried to speak, but guilt choked him. Every attempt to justify myself was a stumble, every gesture a vision of ruin. I stood there. Sometimes power lies precisely there, in remaining silent, because those who endure silence learn to master time. And in that moment, time was on my side. The following days were different. The house, once filled with noise and secrecy, now breathed a sigh of relief. The air seemed lighter, the walls more alive. I began to rediscover forgotten sounds. The birdsong at dawn, the sound of rain hitting the glass, even the sound of my own laughter, timid at first but sincere. It was as if the whole world were giving me back the voice I had given to my pain. And it was in this process that I understood something essential. The truth liberates, but it also transforms. It doesn't restore what was lost, but rather offers something more valuable. The ability to move forward without carrying the weight of what hurt us. I learned that forgiving isn't forgetting. It's ceasing to be a prisoner of the same day. And that's exactly what I did. Today, looking back, I fondly see the woman I once was. She believed, she loved, she trusted. And when everything fell apart, she didn't flinch. She reinvented herself. There's immense beauty in surviving one's own disappointment. It's like being reborn in the same skin, but with a different perspective. Perhaps that's why so many people identify with stories like this, because we've all had a moment when love needed to be replaced by courage. If this story moved you, if at any point you saw yourself reflected in it, leave a silent gesture here. A comment, a sign, something that says, "I understand." Because this exchange is what keeps the flame of healing stories alive. Today, what was once pain has become a lesson learned. I walk lightly, unhurriedly, certain that life's justice doesn't need to be forced. It simply arrives at the right time in the right way. And if there's one thing I want to leave those listening to me now, it's this: don't fear silence. It's the place where truth grows, where strength is forged, where the soul breathes again. Like, comment, and subscribe, not for me but for you. Because every time we choose to listen to a story of courage, we make room for our own to flourish. Today, I am no longer the woman who slept alongside lies. I am the one who woke up to her own freedom. And that's how I want to be remembered. Standing serene, looking forward, with the dignity of someone who understood that love can even depart, but respect that no one can take away from me.